Hello and welcome to the Content Advantage, a talk show about content for content professionals, but folks hopefully just like you. I'm Scott Abel, and joining me today is my co-host Megan Gahuli. Hi, Megan.
Hey, Scott. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good. So I am super excited about today's guest.
Me too.
We have with us Kathy Clemens, who's the Senior Director of Product Documentation. And I've known Kathy for years. In fact, she is a 3-time Zoom-in customer at 3 different companies. She beat me because I was a 2-time customer. And I've known her since back in the day when I was first a customer. So it's really, really good to see you again, Kathy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Hi, it's so nice to see you guys.
Excellent. Thanks for being here. Hey, and for the audience members, in case you've never attended a Bright Talk webinar before, here's just a few things you might want to know. Today's show is being recorded, so if you have to leave at any time early, don't worry about it. You'll get an email reminder a little bit later today that has a link, and you'll be able to click it and watch a recorded version of the show. You can even share that link with other people who you think might be interested in listening to the show. Also, we can't see or hear you, so you don't have to worry about us having access to your camera or microphone. You can ask a question at any time, but here's the caveat. You'll click a little button underneath your webinar viewing panel called Ask a Question, and you'll be able to open up a little text-based window where you can text a question to us, but just know we can't text you the answer back. But rest assured, all the questions will come into our queue, and we'll try to ask Kathy as many of the questions that we can with the time that we have on today's show. Last, there's some additional content in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel. There's troubleshooting information in case you're having any trouble today with your audio or video. There's also some information provided by our sponsors of today's show, Zoom-in Software, and a few links that'll help you with getting in contact with Kathy, for example, or learning more about some of the topics on today's show. All right, let's get started.
All right, so we want to hear a little bit more about you, Kathy. I, of course, know you very well, but our audience does not. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you relate to the topic of today's show, which is building content teams?
Building content teams. I have a little bit of experience there. If I go back and I tell people that I grew up at SAP, that's where I started my career. I've been pretty much in the business of technical communication for most of my career. When I started at SAP, I was a translator. Then I had so many different roles over the many, many years.
I didn't know that.
I won't say how many years I worked there because that might indicate how old I am, but I worked there a long time and wore many different hats. But the one common thread was technical communication, whether it was translator. I was, for a short stint, I was technical support for writers and translators. I was a product manager, a community manager, technical writer. And then, my last gig at SAP was as a manager of a content development team. And I had inherited that team from my predecessor. I always wanted to manage the team because I always felt like I wanted to help improve how we worked. But it was quite a different undertaking once you actually became a manager and you didn't have management training. So that was my first stint. I was thrown in the deep end, as you might say, and my team grew. I had a global organization, little pockets of technical writers around the world. Then I moved to ServiceNow, which is probably when I met you, Megan. And I was a manager of a much larger team, again, a globally dispersed team. And there, my wonderful peers and I were responsible for a lot more, not only just managing a team, but also collectively building and enforcing a content strategy. And then after ServiceNow, I moved to a company called Automation Anywhere. And that was a completely different ball game altogether because there was no existing team when I joined. They had, in fact, hired me to build a team and build out a content strategy where there was none. And in about 2 years' time, we went from one technical writer and no content strategy to a little over 20 people on the team, including writers. We had an editor. We had tools specialists and even some additional managers to help with the team. And then about almost exactly a year ago, I joined BlackLine, where I was tasked to do much the same thing that I did at Automation Anywhere, to build up a team and to build out a content strategy.
Very nice.
Can you talk to us about BlackLine for audience members who don't know what the company is or what the company does, and maybe even the types of content that your teams produce?
Sure. So I think the tagline for BlackLine is the modern continuous accounting platform. And for those of you who aren't necessarily, on the bleeding edge of accounting technology, it really means that, we develop a platform that automates processes, accounting processes, typically, period end processes, where you need to reconcile accounts and make sure that they're all in the black, right? So that's why the BlackLine comes. And so we connect with many different data sources, typically ERP systems, but other types of data sources. And we need to, from a content perspective, we need to deliver content not only about the software itself and how it works, but also about how to set up the connectors to those different data sources. And my team, I keep saying it's small but mighty. We had one writer when I started last year, and now we're up to 3 writers. A 4th one is coming next week. Yay!
Nice.
Yes, and I have one manager of our content and tools platform, and no editors yet. That's really a luxury that we couldn't really get just yet. But we are delivering, because my team is still so small, we've only committed to delivering what we would call user documentation. So focusing primarily on system administrator content, the people who are setting up the product for use, and then the doers. And in our world, they're called the preparers. So they're the ones who are setting up the transactions to be reconciled, or the accounts that need to be reconciled. So those are our 2 primary user audiences. And right now we're only focusing on that, what we would call that user content. But later on, as my team grows, we'll be looking at more of those connector, the really technical back-end information as well. And we are publishing to a brand new platform, Zoomin. That's what makes me. That's why I won the title of the 3rd time, because we brought in Zoom.
You just wanted to one up the rest of us.
That's right. Yeah,
done it twice.
I had to. Yeah, I had to be first at something. So we just brought in Zoom in. I won't say just. It was kind of a long, painstaking process to, not from the Zoom in side, but just to sort of get things moving through the inertia that we had here. But we just went live with our site in July. So we're publishing content in HTML on this new documentation platform. And next month, we are planning to go live with in-app help as well, that will be pulling on that same great content that's in the portal.
Very nice.
Great.
Yeah, that would be super fun. In fact, we need to talk about that after.
And in different languages.
I have, a couple of questions that I just am dying to know. What language did you translate to? I didn't know you spoke another language.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Oh, So I am fluent in German.
Oh, good for you.
I used to translate from German to English.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
The only things I know in German are Fröhliche Weihnachten and Ich bin müde. Yeah.
Oh,
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, and then I'm tired. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do know I'm hungry. Anyway, that's another show altogether. So
depending on the time of day, to order another beer.
Yeah. Very nice. So we are going to talk about the content teams that you have built in the past and the one that you're building currently. Just a quick little shout out for anyone looking for a tech writing job. I think you're still hiring. Is that right?
2022. Yeah.
2022.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are making a move in 2022, contact Kathy today, just to get to know her. Okay, so I'm really interested in sort of how you've gone through this building out content teams. And so when you do something the first time, you kind of make it up as you go. And by the second time, you have a little bit of know-how. But the third time, I feel like you have kind of a framework in mind. So what is that formula or framework you have for building successful content teams?
I would love to say, it works perfectly every time, and it just doesn't. But that said, there are key elements that I reuse, right? There is a structure that or an approach, let's say, that I use when building out my teams. And it's whether you want to call it the strategy or not, I look at the people, the process, the content, and the tools. And they're all separate entities, but they obviously influence each other very much so. And I just have to say that there is no one size fits all. So it could very well be that an organization needs to focus primarily on the people, right? That there's already some good process in place, decent content to work with, and an okay tools platform. So you really need to invest more in the people. In other cases, you need to invest in all four. And so for any of these, let's say, pillars, you'd have to go in and look at what's required for each, right? You always come in with open and flexible attitude, and you need to learn first about the existing organization and figure out where the gaps are. Don't go in and just assume that everything is broken, because there are always things that you can reuse and that are redeeming that you can build on top of.
Very nice. One of the things I love you said is that you have to come in. You can't just sort of expect. And we know a lot of content people that will come into a job and they have the perfect solution, and they try and find the problem to match that solution, right? Like you have this tool that you love, but I do know that when you came into each of those places, you didn't just assume Zoomin's the tool because I love Zoomin. You came in and you said, what are the needs? And you did the whole 9 yards every single time, which I think is really impressive.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I think we've all had managers like that, right? If you've worked at any kind of a large corporation, right? You have a new manager every 6 months, right? And so, half the time you're just, fingers crossed, oh, please don't let them change everything, right? Categorically. And I think that's also a sign of maybe a newer leader, somebody who needs to make a big impact and show that like they've transformed things in a very short period of time. Right. But I think, I'm a little mature now. I think I'm learning those lessons, because I fell under that same, I did those same things as well, right? Where I think I have to make a big impact and fast. Right. And then you end up making a lot of unnecessary mistakes that you cause a lot of rework. So I think, coming in with a little bit more maturity and investigating first, and understanding what you have to work with. And what the business requirements are too.
Can we speak just for a minute about the mistakes? I think that's something that sometimes gets glossed over. Anybody that reads like Silicon Valley folklore of successful people knows that there's a very common mantra that angel investors and people that are willing to give money for new ideas, they like to support people who may have made a few mistakes along the way, with the notion being they've learned some hard lessons and they won't be learning it with my cash, right? Like they will have spent other people's money and now
you got it all out of your system, right?
So do you have any lessons for people that you could say, look, it's easy to make these mistakes, skip this one and you'll save yourself some time or pain?
Sure. How long is your show?
Right. Oh, there you go.
I mean, I think, there are a number of them, right? And I'm not even exaggerating, right? I think the only way that you can be successful is through lots of hopefully there are many failures along the way. Hopefully if you fail, that whole fail fast, hopefully you're doing that, fail early, fail fast, and fail small, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully there are calculated risks. Right.
Epic
exactly. Don't completely ruin your career, all that fun stuff, right? So some of the things that spring to mind, and I have to say, I fell prey to this in my last company. I hired way too fast. I built the team up in too short of a time. We grew way too fast. And remember I talked about those 4 pillars, the people, process, content, tools.
Oh yeah.
The other parts of it were not ready to sustain the rapid growth. Now, but as any manager knows, and I'm sure there's managers out there who were like me, that if you get resources, you're going to jump on it, right? You're not going to say, oh, no. Exactly. Because as quickly as they hand it to you, they could take it away. And we had an amazing recruitment team at my last companies, and I had a lot of connections as well. So we were rapidly hiring people early on. The good thing is that I had, at my last company, I really tried to focus on, my early hires were people who were really seasoned professionals that were capable of being team leads, or area, product area leads, that kind of thing. And so that definitely helped. So when I could go back, when we had this larger team and we were still sort of figuring out what our style guide was, what our process was, what the tools were that we were going to use, at least, I had some of these seasoned professionals who would roll with the punches, right, if we had to change things later on. But in hindsight, I think I would have maybe tempered that a little bit and slowed the progression of hiring the team too quickly. And then, the sort of the flip side of that is if your team is too small, but that work is still there and it starts piling up and piling up. Like when you start in a new job, you have that grace period in the beginning where they allow you to learn, but quickly they're on top of you and they're like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Right. And like I said, the workload piles up. So if you're overloading your team too quickly, that's also a disaster waiting to happen. I think everybody, again, new people, they want to prove themselves and deliver, but you reach that point of burnout very quickly. And a lot of times there's no recovery from that. You can really demotivate your team by doing that. So, like overloading your team is a really bad idea. So what do you do to deal with that? You have to set expectations early on and say, okay, with your team and then also with your peers, with your organization, to say, look, I'm gonna focus on these 2 or 3 things and do them really well rather than these 20 things and do them really kind of shoddy,
Right. Yeah, it's such a balancing act. And I like where you're heading with it. You have to balance. Do you come in and set up processes right away? Or do you come in and hire the team right away? And you kind of have to do both in parallel, unfortunately. But you need to balance it in a way that you're not over engineering the process and then people can't keep up. But at the same time, you're not bringing in people into sort of this wishy-washy process that makes them ineffective. So it's a really interesting balancing act.
I think that's interesting that you would tell us that, because it is something that I've not thought about recently, but it has happened to me. In fact, I remember now my first job ever that would be like close to this, right? It was in a pharmaceutical company. And I was segueing from like college jobs, like, partying in the entertainment industry to my first real job.
And hand modeling, right, Scott?
Hand modeling, exactly. And so I went to this job and I was flabbergasted that it was this big company, right? Pharmaceutical company. In my state, it was like the #1 employer. And in the world, it's like, within the top 10 companies or whatever, as far as revenue. And I thought to myself, how can I possibly be sitting in a cubicle and I only have a chair and a trash can? for days. And they would bring me stuff every once in a
Wow.
while. They're like, oh, I know the IT people, they're working on your computer, but they have their own processes. And a couple weeks from now, you'll get a Windows machine. Can I bring anything in? Oh, no, because security. So you can't bring anything in. So I would sit there, and every once in a while they would come by and they would bring me printed handouts, like PowerPoint slides.
For you to edit.
And it gave me something to do. And I'm like, what am I doing in here? Why are you paying me? You should have just told me your job starts in 3 weeks, right? But instead, I think they had kind of this exuberance about building the team. And so maybe that is good advice. Temper that exuberance until you're ready. And
what I found,
the maturity of the organization, though, too, Kathy, because this organization was very mature, but their onboarding process was never speedy. Like everyone after my hiring manager was not surprised. They're like, no computer, could be weeks.
That's where you probably benefit from working at a smaller company, right? Because then the same person who onboards you is the one getting your equipment or setting up your work environment. In those larger corporations, right? It's like there's one person that's responsible for one small part of that process, right?
Exactly. I think size matters and organization matters. But thank you for sharing that. I think that mostly it's the hire.
Oh, yeah. And what I wanted to say about that, too, is really, right, as a manager, as a hiring manager, you're looking to hire, you figure out what are the skills required for that job. What are the general requirements for that job, and what are the special skills? And then you hire to fill that, right? Ideally, you're hiring, a very competent professional person who's able to manage their time. Like you're hiring that professional so that they can do their job, learn, and keep reaching for that next goal. And so in a way, you're hiring for the future of that role, right? You're not hiring for the right away. You want somebody to kind of grow into that role. And that the growing into that role part is people who will be able to do the things that they started out doing, but then doing a whole bunch more. And so I think that's, like I said, that was a really big lesson that I had learned, that the people I hired were more than competent. They were all professionals. And that after a certain period of time, they were able to do what they were doing in the beginning, but so much more. And so, we had overhired. And then the downside of that is, when COVID hit and a lot of companies were downsizing, my team took a hit because of that, right? Because they said, certain areas we were no longer investing in. And that's something that I really regret. Like, was it because we overhired? I think as a company, we had overhired as well for the exuberance of the recruitment teams and, the efficiency of the recruitment team. But, that's definitely a downside to that.
So, bringing up COVID is interesting because, of course, that was a huge roadblock for pretty much everyone in the world, right?
Yeah.
But it makes me think about other roadblocks. There's always roadblocks, no matter how well we think out our content strategy, no matter how strong our logic is, inevitably we're going to encounter some unexpected barriers or roadblocks. So what kinds of roadblocks, aside from COVID, have you encountered? And can you kind of talk about how you overcame them?
I have so many exampple from my current company, and we're, when we're still running into them. The first one that jumps to mind is when I came on board and I did my analysis and I came up with this grand plan, my objective statement was really to provide users easy access to the content they need to do their jobs successfully, right? And part of that meant changing the environment, the platform on which we were publishing content, because there was a lot of obstacles to them getting access to it. This is one of the reasons why we brought in Zoomin. And this wasn't a plug for Zoomin, but it was just, we knew we needed to bring in another platform, and this new platform provided us those capabilities that we thought would improve the overall experience. So that said, the next question was, how do we go about it? How do we, do we make that content available to anybody, right? Because in my past experience, we launched a documentation portal that was public facing, because we used the argument with the leadership team that we can actually drive revenue through a documentation portal. If users are doing a search for, in that case, the RPA technology, they could find documentation articles that would bring them into our documentation portal, and then maybe make them stay to look at some of the other offerings that we had. And they could, potential customers could come in that way. That was the argument that I had used at BlackLine to make our documentation public. And I was all set to move public. I think I had reached out to Scott at one point too, to help me build my case. And you gave me some great information as well. I had reached out to a number of other people. I think I posted something on LinkedIn. I had a rock solid case. I was systematically going after stakeholders to get them to agree to it. Everybody individually agreed, but then when we all came together, there was one dissenting voice, and they said, no, we can't do this. Despite my best attempts. And so that was like the realization that oh, okay, that my grand plan is not going to come to fruition. That was a major obstacle in my journey so far. So there was quite a bit of adjusting that needed to happen, because we had already taken it to a certain point that we were going to go public. Then had to change gears. We had to talk about single sign-on. We had to talk about other types of flows. How would employees access it? How would external customers and partners access it? The good news is, I looked at that as that was just we needed to have the plan B and a C, plan C, D, E, right? we've since had those, right?
Yeah.
I start with I put together the big plan of this is where we want to go. And this is my 3-year plan. This is what I can do on a short term that, my first year plan, I have a lot more details. The second year, a little fewer details. And then the third year is really stretch goals, where we want to see the future of technical content. And so I had to modify it, right? The 3-year goal, maybe that got pushed out to 4 years, but actually it's still achievable. We just need to find smaller milestones on that journey, right? So I'm still moving in that direction, and I'm not giving up on the public, right? We launched our site with the single sign-on, but I'm not giving up on that, because I truly believe that's a valuable asset to the company as a whole to bring in more potential customers, prospects. So that was one. Another one was not having the right kind of metrics, so the right kind of data to make my case. So I thought I had the right kind of data. One of the things too, right, I was talking about moving from a legacy content environment that was not satisfactory to a new content platform. And I made a lot of assumptions just based off of my own opinions. I went in there, I looked at it, I thought, oh, this is awful. And I interviewed so many different people across the organization. They also said it was awful. They said that the customer said it was awful. And then what I ended up doing was I wanted to do a baseline survey to just sort of verify with the actual users of the legacy site. And we launched this survey. We let it go for it was like a Survey Monkey, and it went for a little over a month. And I'll tell you, they raved about the legacy environment.
Really?
It totally blew my mind. They were like, yeah, I put 3 questions in there. It was more about, I can find the information I need. When I find the information, I can rely on its accuracy. And the third one was about the overall experience. And they all or the majority of the respondents had raved about the legacy environment. So it just blew all of my assumptions and all of the data that I had out of the water. But then I dug a little deeper into the respondents. It turns out that the survey was really only sent to our, what do you call them? They're kind
happy
of like
customer.
our super, that's our super users.
The happy customer.
So they're like raising, they're like,
oh my gosh.
they carry the BlackLine flag. They're like, we love BlackLine.
Yeah.
Give us more.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Then
Good
I
for
looked
you
into
for
other data.
looking deeper. That's wow.
Well, yeah. And then we looked at other data that we had available, not much. And that data was page views, in the legacy content. And we compared those to what we knew was considered really good content, like the training content. We know that the users are coming into the legacy environment to access the training. So they're basically stepping into this environment and then jumping off to another one. So the page views were way lower than what we saw in the training. So that was the data that we used. And so, again, that lesson learned was, there's, so much data out there. You really need to find out what the true source is, source of truth is.
Yeah.
I really like that you talked about that, because I remember a project that involved a multinational company, and there had been a big sale of this, it was equipment manufacturer, to a government in Norway. And it was a big deal, like billions of dollars worth of sales, but it was billions over years. So they were making a commitment to spend X number of dollars over 20 or 30 years. But in the pie chart that the sales team shows, it did a breakdown by geography. And so it showed like this giant Norway. So everyone was like, we need to be converting all the content to Norwegian.
Oh my gosh.
They totally started doing this. They were localizing everything in Norwegian. And so people were like, why are they doing this? You know that we never held a meeting in Norwegian. We never gave them Norwegian materials. The contract was in English. The meetings were in English. Everything was in English. And then they asked for English content. And now you're converting all the content on the website. So, of course, a deeper dive showed that this was an anomaly purchase. And if you only looked at it in the pie chart of your 90-day sales, it looks like Norway is outselling everywhere on the planet.
Go Norway.
With one purchase, by the way, which is what the deeper dive. The person who looked at it said, okay, wait a minute. That chunk is pretty impressive. And clearly we're getting some cash from Norway.
Yes.
But is it in one transaction? And when they look, they're like, oh, this is over many years. And by the way, the transaction's actually complete. So converting the content to Norwegian is just in case there are other Norwegians waiting to give us $1 billion.
But then they'd be ready.
They'd be ready.
That content would be.
I was just trying to make the point that it made sense to them at the moment because, as you pointed out, that's the data they had.
Yes.
They didn't dig any deeper until somebody said, "Wait a minute."
Yeah. Well, I think we're very clear now, especially in the last year and a half, 2 years, that
I think so too.
You can find a data point to support any theory that you have, right? The confirmation bias in the world today is like incredibly strong. So you can always find a data point. You can make it prove whatever you want it to prove. But the best thing is to look at your data points and try and disconfirm them. Because once you start disconfirming them, you start to get a truer picture. And if you can't disconfirm them, then your theory is supported.
And I think that's really important too. Finding the data points that's important to your company, right? Because it's not always the same, right? I saw there was a presentation that you guys, or there was a content advantage that you guys did a couple weeks ago about justifying or getting things approved through your leadership. And I think it's really important to sort of drill down into that, right? And understand. So, you're always looking at what's important for the business and what's important for your customers. Hopefully you'll find that intersection and like zero down on that and figure out, like map your goals to that. But like you also need to know who you're speaking to, who your audience is. Like if your stakeholders are really laser focus on revenue,
Right.
increasing revenue, or if it's more reducing the cost of support, right?
Yeah.
And product content or technical content can address both of those. But
Right.
you kind of want to know, like, what ratio of argument do you want to invest in either of those?
Absolutely.
Well, there's a lot of knowledge that you could share with us. Maybe there'll be a book in the future, and if so, let me know.
I'll co-write it with you both.
You can call, can call us. We're ready to get a book going.
Let's go.
But before we do, hey Megan, this seems like a really good time to tell the audience who might not be familiar about Zoom and software, what your company does and how it relates to today's show topic.
Yes, absolutely. So Zoomin is a platform that ingests technical product content from any source. It doesn't matter if it's structured or unstructured, if it's sitting in a CCMS, another CMS, some sort of repository. No matter where it was created or published, we deliver it into a documentation portal, inside the community, into a customer service site, or even inside the product itself, which Kathy alluded to earlier. And the way that it relates today is that, Kathy has used Zoomin to help her build multiple content teams. I've used it twice to build content teams. So it's that sort of tool of choice for a lot of folks.
Excellent. And for the audience members who don't know, there's a button called attachments under your webinar viewing panel where you can grab some information from Zoomin. There's some links there that'll take you directly to the website where you can request a demonstration or talk to somebody if you'd like to know more about the platform. There's also some handouts available that you can download, and you can, of course, check them out on the Zoomin website, which is zoominsoftware.com. All right, well, Kathy, let's get back to our discussion before we close out today. We've got some questions coming in from the audience. So audience members, if you've yet to ask a question, you can use the Ask a Questions tab located under your webinar viewing panel to ask Kathy a question. So Kathy, if you're a leader, maybe you're hired to do some new content team or grow some existing one, what first step would you take if you were giving advice to a new leader? What's the first thing they should do before they take off growing their team?
I probably mentioned it in some way before, but the very first thing is to come in with what my kids always talk about, a growth mindset. Don't come in with a fixed mindset. Obviously, they've hired you for a reason because you've got great experience, you've got mad skills, but don't go in and like with the idea I'm going to change everything and make it my own. Go in with that growth mindset. Try to understand, interview stakeholders from across the organization. Ask them what's working well. Ask them what's not working well. Ask them what are the requirements. What are the customers asking for? What is the business asking for? And try and map what your team, what you as a leader and what your team can eventually deliver to satisfy those requirements.
That's always a good first step, I think. It's probably no different, right, from project to project, but we skip it sometimes, as you and I both know. Sometimes we think, we know, we've done this before. We'll just do what we did before. But I think that's
absolutely
right. And maybe developers do this sometimes too, and technical communicators get frustrated with them because we say, just build something different for the customer, and then I won't have to explain why it doesn't work the way it should. Go make it work. And they go, well, we're used to developing in this way. And so I think maybe they just decide that every problem is solved by the way that they develop instead of what problem do we have and what's the best way to solve it.
Yeah,
I was so guilty of that coming to BlackLine. It was almost exactly the same situation. From the outside looking in, it looked like the exact same situation as my last company, right? The company was the same size. We also only had one writer with, who wasn't necessarily attached to a team, didn't really have much direction. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to take this content strategy and just plug it in here. And boy, did I learn otherwise. Right?
That's never a good idea.
It seems like a really good idea, though.
It does.
Right?
Again, like my long-term goals are really, if I look at my 3-year plan, it's still pretty much the same. But what those steps are along the way are slightly different.
Yeah. I think you can steal some of the content strategy, meaning the high-level tenets and mission and things like that, because those, once you sort of prove out, you can reuse. But the actual steps, the tactics of getting there have to change a bit. One of my favorite tenets of all time is one that we used at Amazon Seller Support, and that is the best help is no help needed. And that was a way for us to ensure that instead of just taking what was thrown over the fence at us, we would look at the content and the team would say, is this really just working around a problem with the product? Because if so, we need to log a bug with the product, right? And not just take it on and be that final, I don't know, punching bag that, has to get it out. So
I love that. And so my last company, it was an automation platform. And the marketing teams at my last company were always talking about, that there's this fear of automation taking over people's jobs.
Yes.
And so they did a lot of marketing to basically alleviate that fear, right? Remove that fear and basically say, like, automation is actually going to help you, free you up to do more detailed, like, brain work, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the way I communicated with my team as well. Like, our goal is to make our jobs obsolete.
Oh, totally. Right? That's the same thing.
Let's look at even automating, just simplifying things, making our content so easy to use. So, you're creating it with muscle memory.
Yes.
So that our jobs will be obsolete, and then we can move on to bigger and greater things, right?
I've said a very similar thing. I've told teams, I dare you to try to automate your job.
Yeah.
And if you're successful in completely automating yourself out of a job, you will never go without a job because the next people are going to want you, right?
Right on.
That's right. You'll always have a job.
Yeah, exactly.
So Megan, I know we're running out of time, and I wanted to suggest that maybe you could go into our favorite topic, which is elevation of our teams, and then we'll take questions from the audience.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we love to talk about is how do we elevate content teams so that they feel like they're a strategic advantage to the company, so that the content is a strategic advantage to the company. And so what kind of advice do you have for leaders who really want to showcase the value of their content teams, the value of their content, or just in general, elevate the importance of their tech content team within the organization?
So some of the things that I touched on before, right? About doing your research to put together some sort of your elevator pitch to talk about the value and what your team brings to the table. Part of that is understanding, again, what the business needs are. Is that reducing the cost of sport, increasing the revenue? Is it process, thought leadership? You also want to understand what the customer's needs are, what's important to them. Is it the return on their investment? Is it speed of implementation? Is it automation? Is it just ease of use, whatever? And then you're going to have to put together, figure out where that intersection is between the business needs, the customer needs, and then what your team can deliver to meet those needs, right? That's where the intersection is. That's your elevator pitch. And I have a set of slides that I reuse in any of my stakeholder meetings where I need to really reinforce those things. Or if I'm meeting a new stakeholder, I'm introducing myself and then explaining what the value my team brings to the table. But then the other part of that is every single person on your team needs to be a part of that value, right? Like they need to share the load. And I don't mean sharing the load of just the content creation, but it's also sharing the load of helping to develop that value proposition, to help be messengers of that value proposition as well. Because I think they have to feel it. They have to know why they're waking up every morning and doing the job that they're doing. And part of that is also trying to find, people who are motivated and really believe in that journey. Yeah.
And believe in the team journey and where the team's going, not just believe in, the Oxford comma has to be there. Sometimes we get so stuck in the details.
We get so mired down in that.
Especially us as technical writers. We're like, oh my gosh, it's got to be perfect. But it's not always about perfection. It's about going the direction the team's going together, right?
The last part of this too, and maybe this is just like, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that deliver what you've committed to, right? You've got to show some integrity, right? So if you know that your 3-year plan, right, the things that you planned in your first year are just not achievable, remove them, push them out. If they're still on your roadmap, push them out at a realistic time frame, so that you can still continue to deliver on what your commitments are. I think that's, I'm experiencing that right now. Like I said, we launched this doc site. Up until now, I felt a bit like a fraud, not a fraud. What's the word? Like I've been all talk and no action, right? Yeah. Up until the point where we launched our doc site, I was like, oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. Believe me, I've done this before. But until those stakeholders actually see some results, it's all just talk. So that's even more reason to plan some smaller milestones along the way, so that you could have, you can start to develop these small successes, and you could use that as a platform to stand on to say, hey, we're so great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Let's take a question from the audience real quickly. We've got a couple of them, actually. One person says that they're starting to build their very first content team in the next few months. And congratulations. And I'm wondering if communicating my uncertainty in our data that I'm using to my manager would be a strong signal that I'm not qualified to build the team. How do you balance uncertainty and leaning on your manager for guidance when your manager doesn't have content experience? What a great question.
That is a great question. I think there's a certain amount of, you have to be upfront and honest. You can't fake the data. So to a certain extent, you need to be open and honest and say, look, I don't have the data, but maybe if I had that data, I could make some of those key decisions. And so you frame it in such a way that you need your direct leadership to help you identify what that data is, what's important. You do need access to some sort of data, if nothing else, even if it's anecdotal from other stakeholders, like customer facing. I'm just assuming it's customer facing. Sorry, because that's my role. But if depending on what type of content you're developing, find those stakeholders that it's important to, and interview them, even if it's anecdotal. Ask them what kind of data they have to back up even their statements, and start to rely on that. You could build up many different resources.
What do you think about the uncertainty angle? I get why they are concerned that they could be viewed in a negative light, but it seems like that could work the other way too, where somebody could see that you're being diligent and actually trying to figure out what you should do and be a good steward of the company's resources.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's a certain amount of uncertainty that comes with any role. I'll be the first to admit there's a lot of uncertainty every day. There's like, okay, should I go right or should I go left? Right. But owning that and saying, look, I had that question, should I go right or should I go left? But I made the decision I'm going to go right, and this is the reason why. And I'm looking for this level of data. Maybe there are a lot of different resources out there. I'd be happy to help out, come up with some ideas too of places that you could go to find out just even basic levels of data that you could use to make those initial decisions. Especially as a first time building out a team, you are going to rely on a lot of different resources just outside of your own team. So don't be afraid to ask for help. I think asking for help actually shows a lot of maturity too, because you're a learner. You're starting out a new position. You need to come from that position of learning and wanting to understand what's important.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'd be really curious to know from the person who wrote this question whether when they were talking about uncertainty in the data, I think they said about communicating my uncertainty. So I wonder if that is, I'm not sure how to use the data.
Yeah.
If that is, I'm not sure where
if
the
I can
data
rely the data.
Like your idea, like did we go out to people that already are predisposed to saying yes, and then we got a bunch of yeses? Like I don't know where it came from. Or is it that the data's wrong and you feel like you're being steamrolled a bit by your manager because your manager just loves this data, right? And so I think it depends on where the uncertainty is. But I think it's always good to question data. Every data point should be questioned. It should be questioned.
Well, certainly data science people take this seriously, right? It's part of knowing that their information has some validity, is when somebody else can ask a question of it and it can be defended. And you know what? Sometimes the answer is, we don't know. Let's do more research. And I think, Kathy, that's what I learned from your story earlier, was we have assumptions and then we have data and then we have a plan. And then sometimes plan is like, oop, we need a plan B, right? Because plan A was based on a lot of assumptions, which makes me wonder, is validate assumptions really something we should add to our checklist? We just really need to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I actually did a talk once at one of the conferences, and it had this very thing where it showed how you make assumptions and then you take an action and then you measure it. And most people go from, oh, the measurement didn't add up, let's go back to the action. But really what you want to do is you want to go all the way back to the assumption.
Right.
Usually it's the assumption that's wrong, not the action was not executed effectively, right? So that's interesting. There's a couple more questions and I want to make sure we get to them. Someone says, if you have lots of seasoned writers, how do you manage the change required to bring them into a unified style? He or she has found this difficult, especially if a product manager prefers the writer's style.
Oh, so I wonder, is that coming from, so I wonder if there's an issue with the product manager and the senior writer sort of working, like they're a good unit.
Right.
They don't want to.
And the manager wants something different, I imagine.
That is tough. You know what? I'm not going to lie. I feel like it's important to have a good mix of seasoned writers and newer writers too. Not, because the newer writers, you can help sort of like mold or at least, train them towards your vision or your styles. And sometimes it can be difficult with, seasoned writers who think like, no, I've done this before so many times, it's like muscle memory. But I think that, again, that goes to, if you're hiring writers, to look for people who are also have that growth mindset, that they're still open to learning and changing. If you inherit writers, that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you need other ways to motivate them. I think part of it is what I was talking about before, is getting them involved in that, defining what that value proposition is and making them understand that they're, them going a different direction is going to, in effect, cause a lot more rework, a lot more, there's a lot of cost associated with that if you're not working like in one voice and developing content in the same way. I think most of the times you can motivate that person. And then also, if you're the leader, they also might need some coaching in that, because maybe it's a new approach that they haven't seen in their career.
Right. I also wonder if, and I hope this isn't offensive to the person who put it, but I wonder if maybe you should sit down and figure out, why does that product manager prefer that writer's style? Is there something there? Is there a reason why those two people have a different opinion than yours? And sit down and really try and just confirm your own beliefs, right? Your own assumptions, that your style or the way that you're thinking through it is right. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But until you sit down and have that dialogue, you aren't really being open to either whatever's best for the customer.
Do you think
and test it out?
Is there something in there about? Is there something hidden in there about preferences too? I once was told by a manager that she delegated the job of hiring some people to her subordinate, and because that person knew a lot of stuff about the landscape, they had great broad knowledge.
Right.
And so she said, but my mistake was that person basically just cloned themselves. They were basically, I'm not good at this, and this is, and you know what? I never ever violate the Oxford comma thing. There's always a semicolon at the end of every book.
So that's in every interview.
Right,
what do you think about the Oxford comma?
Right. If you violated that, you were one of those people. They were like, oh, you're in the B stack, and the A stack are the people that are more like me, and they never set it out to be that way. It just kind of ended up that way. I wonder if that maybe also the product manager has some familiarity with this particular person, and the content they wrote has been good enough for them, and they're like, well, don't mess that up.
Comfortable, right? No need, exactly. It's comfortable.
It's hard to know. So whoever put this in, contact me, contact Scott, contact Kathy. We'll give you more specific advice.
You know, and we have certain you know, I've seen this before too, where we've got product managers who like to dictate what's going in the content. And then the writer is just a glorified editor, you know, doing copy editing. And that's okay either, right? So, you know, I think there's also a certain amount of setting boundaries as far as, okay, this is what my role is and this is what your role is. And so, you know, maybe that's also something that you might consider.
Yeah, one of the things you can do to ensure that unification, no matter who's right or wrong, as long as you come together and you decide on a style guide, you don't even have to sit. We used to go through, the first thing you did as a manager when you took on a doc team was you sat down, you wrote a new style guide, right? Or you rolled it out to other people. And what a pain in the butt that was. But there are so many great style guides.
You have to set up those boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many great style guides out there today. When I joined Ping Identity, the first thing I did, I found out they didn't have a style guide, or the style guide they had was, you know, it was way outdated. Like it hadn't been kept up in 10 years. So in essence, they had none. So I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to adopt the IBM style guide. And people said, yeah, but it says this and this and this. I said, okay, we're going to go through chapter by chapter. And I made my team read chapter 1 on the first week. And then we sat and talked about what we disagreed with. And if there was anything we disagreed with, we all marked it in the book. And then we went on to chapter 2 the next week. And we did this for 7 weeks or 8 weeks, however long the book is.
That's a great way. And speaking of a book, we did mention a little teaser earlier that maybe we should write a book. And I just wanted to let you know that one of our viewers said they would pre-order that book in a hot minute. So
awesome. We're on
our first sale.
Yay.
That's all right. We're okay. This is it.
All right.
We're starting the planning.
Here we go.
Right after this.
All right. So unfortunately, we're running out of time, and this was great discussion. So thank you very much for being here today, Kathy. This has been amazing. And
you guys are great.
The audience
also great.
Thank you. They've been very participating and very generous with their time and their questions. So thank you to the audience members as well. Let me tell you a few things about what's coming up. So 2 weeks from now, we want you to join us on September 28th for a chat with Carolyn Swift-Mushat. She's the Senior Director of Software Engineering at Cengage Learning. She's going to talk to her about her journey developing a content engineering team. She's got some secrets in there and some experiences she'd like to share. We're going to discuss the business cases for investing and bringing all your editorial, software development, product management teams together under one digital umbrella where you can work with your content. And you'll learn why Cengage is working to integrate the technology organization and the content team together and find out why it's needed. So definitely you want to show up for that show. And then let's see, we've got 2 weeks later, we'll be having this great show with the Director of Knowledge Management, Liz Krog at Expedia, about how her team is empowering business partners to find all the answers to the questions they need without having to call customer support. I know that's a big topic, so you definitely want to show up for that show too. And of course, you've been watching Kathy Clemens, and Megan and I talked about lessons learned building content teams today. So thank you for joining us for this show. It was amazing, and thank you, Kathy. It's been great. It's lively conversation.
For me too.
Kathy, you're delightful. Good to see you again. Before everyone signs off, please use the Rate This tab located in your webinar viewing panel and give us a 1 to 5 star rating. Also put a comment. We read every single comment. We want to make this better for you. Kathy, you are tremendous. Thank you. Good to see you. I'll call you about the book.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And we'll see you on a future edition of the Content Advantage.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoomin. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoomansoftware.com.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Bye.
day. Bye.